Good afternoon to the majority of my viewers in the Western Hemisphere, except for folks on the Pacific Coast. Good morning to you, and good late afternoon and evening to folks in Europe, and good very early morning to the folks in the Pacific Rim. And welcome everybody to the Angry Astronaut. I really do appreciate you tuning in. First of all, just want to let you know that we have a very special guest joining us today, live from California. We have a man who's running for Congress. He's running for Congress in California. His name is Daniel Martinez, and he is an individual who is extremely spaceflight oriented. He is a space geek, very much based on the conversations that I've had with him already. And we're going to have some conversations about how we can implement spaceflight and our expansion into the solar system through the government. How do we get the government to really want to do this? And one of our ways to implement all of this is to talk about Earth 1,000 years from now. How do we survive that long? And they sound like an interesting way of approaching this, but that is what we're doing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Daniel Martinez.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to explore this with you.
Wonderful. If you would be so kind and just give us a real quick rundown on who you are and how your political platform fits into to our kind of space flight we like.
Yes, so I had a pretty unique opportunity in that the incumbent that I'm running against is 86 years old. She's born 6 years before World War II. And the national parties, she was going to run unopposed. The national party wasn't interested in the race. So I decided to take the race and bring attention to issues that I think are important. And on any particular issue, I look at it completely independent of either political party and look at it from the perspective of a representative that's mediating the various interest groups that live within their district and then coordinating a solution to make sure that we have a vision, not just in 6 months or 6 years, but also in 60 years and in 600 years, because it's based off of a principle that in order for us to know which steps to take in the present or which steps to take in the next 5 years and the next 50 years, we have to be able to conceptualize where we'd like to be in 600 years, or in this case, 1,000 years.
Now, one thing that we discussed briefly was the your position on government regulation and how this sort of thing holds up things like Starship, that sort of thing. And you had expressed to me that there's some definitely changes that need to be made there. Do you care to elaborate at all on that particular issue?
Absolutely, but if I can give a background for a parallel issue,
Sure,
and
go ahead.
this is one of the other reasons why I decided to do this run is I work with a group of retired Navy SEALs and Army Rangers who are at the cutting edge of technology for and treatment protocols for PTSD and suicidal ideation. And these guys have a treatment protocol that works. Like it works 75-80% of the time. The problem is it's stuck in regulatory bureaucratic hell. There's regulatory, and there's bureaucratic reasons for why this treatment that could alleviate the veteran suicide rate of 22 a day. You could cut that down by an order of magnitude. And it's not available because there's roadblocks in the way. And that's one of the reasons why I was reaching out to Angry, because I see a similar pattern of what's happening in the space industry. We have individuals like Elon Musk who have plans, longer term plans to get to Mars, and they are close to having the capacity to do that. And one of the major barriers that I see is not the pace of scientific development, because that's on Elon and the private sector, but that the pace of scientific development seems to be proceeding at a much quicker pace than the regulatory scheme. And the clearest example of that is how long it took for for Starship to be able to get treatment, to get approval to test at Boca Chica.
Right. And I heard the Freudian slip of treatment because it is so similar, isn't it? I mean, if we're approaching things from a different angle, and we're trying to do things in a unique sort of way, that scares people. It scares people in the establishment. And so the immediate reaction is resistance. By the way, Anton Nim, thank you so much for the $10 super chat that just came through. James Caan, yes, indeed, one of my favorite actors of all time. So yeah, it's this is going to be an interesting conversation. By the way, this is going to be a longer video than our usual videos because this is a bit in depth. So that could take some time also. But in any event, when we were discussing, Earth 3100, I mean, when you ask the average person, okay, where do you see the human race? Where do you see us being in 1,000 years? I mean, nobody can even really, it's very difficult to answer that question. Virtually nobody really can answer that question. I mean, look at how far we've come in just 100 years. And given all of the crises that our planet currently faces, that our civilization currently faces, the whole notion that we could even survive for another 1,000 years seems unlikely. I mean, it does seem that there are so many things that could take us out that the survival of human civilization for another 1,000 years looks pretty grim. So we had some discussions as to how we might be able to change that scenario, change those probabilities by going to space. So that having been said, Daniel, I mean, can you give me some examples of some ideas that come to mind with you as far as space is concerned and how that helps us to work together as a planet and as a species?
Yeah. So what I would suggest is let's start the story from 3100, and we'll work backwards to the technology in the present. Right. So one of the most common things that I hear, like when I've been asking people this question, like, like how do you imagine humanity would be in the year 3100? The most common answer I get is they don't think that we're going to make it that long. They actually think that with the present rate of conflict and risk of nuclear war and climate change and climate disaster, that few people have ever actually spent time outside of science fiction conceptualizing what the world would look like at that date. And so when you and I first discussed approaching this question, we would we would ask initially, well, is humanity still alive? Right? Is the spark of consciousness still burning?
Right.
And I mean, the short discussion would be to say no, right? Because then there's not too much more to imagine.
Right.
But then if you answer the binary question the other way, yes, right? Well, then what conditions would have had to be necessary in order to make that future possible, right? So we would have had to not exterminate ourselves with nuclear war. We would have had to find some technological solution to allow us to either prevent climate change or to adapt to the ongoing climate change. And and then are we an interplanetary species? Are we an intergalactic species? Right? Like now, sort of becomes the fun part, right? I would like to assume that it's a reasonable goal within the next 1,000 years to have permanent colonies on at least Moon and Mars.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that's reasonably, if we can prevent the catastrophic disasters and we can unite the human race, like one of the ways that I like to conceptualize the earth as a giant spaceship, right? We don't really appreciate it like it's a spaceship, but it is protecting us from the void of space that would kill us all instantly if we were out there. So
Right.
we share that spaceship with 6 billion other people, right? And when you see somebody like digging a hole, like drilling a hole in the side of the International Space Station, the rest of the people might want to intervene and stop them, right? If there
Mhm.
was a leak in one part of the space station, it might be a good idea to chip in and help fix it on the other side, even if it's not your side of the space station.
Right.
And
Y-
go
Yeah,
ahead.
I mean, we kind of discussed a bit of that is the whole notion of going to space, requires that we end up working together much more so than we already do. Obviously, we already have this nasty political event on the ISS, with the Russians supporting the war in Ukraine, which I'm pretty sure was under orders. Real quick, I'm sorry to cut in here again, but for the
Mhm.
benefit of folks who are supporting us, Popsu250, thank you so much for your support. High Q as well. And just to let you know, Popsu, I have a video coming out about the mystery moon rocket crash coming out real soon. A little tidbit that I'm going to release about that. So once again, to get back to it, yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about this, and it
Mhm.
goes to other extremes as well. It's not just about what we're doing to our environment. For example, let's talk about the crises in the Middle East and the various organizations that are looking to destroy anybody who isn't like them. Can we really imagine that organizations like Al Qaeda and ISIS will never be able to get their hands on nuclear weapons for the next 1,000 years? Well, no, I don't see how we can prevent them from ever getting it. And killing all of them obviously doesn't work. We tried that for 20 years, it doesn't work.
Yeah,
So it
and it's
seems
not,
to me that.
and it's
Go
quite
ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
counterproductive. It's quite counterproductive. It actually makes more of them, right? But so
Exactly.
one of the reasons why I like to conceptualize this on a 1,000 year timeline, right, is because then you get to ask the question: what conditions are necessary to be able to bring that future reality into the present, right? To manifest that future reality. And one of the issues that you're addressing is the fixing the like bridging the gap between the tribe of people that live in the Middle East who have a cultural tradition that goes back 1,000 years, separated from ours, right? And we haven't found a way to adequately bridge that gap using the strategy that we've employed in the past 600 years, which usually involves some form of colonization or conquest or attempt to um, impose our culture onto them by force. And so, um, I mean, I personally believe that our policy in the Middle East has been entirely counterproductive in the past 20 years, and that there are economic means, there there are ways that we can bridge the gap through economic means, and that's more likely, that's far more likely to have an effect on liberalizing their culture than um, trying to do it by force.
Well, yeah, and that's something that occurred to me as well. I mean, what keeps these organizations alive is the fact that they have recruited lots of young, mostly male people, but some women as well, throughout the Middle East and elsewhere, who weren't even alive or were tiny little children when 9/11 happened. A whole new crop, a whole new generation of
Hmm.
recruits. So, instead of trying to kill all of those recruits, instead, the motivation is, why can't we give them something better to do? Because right now in the Middle East, because of poverty, because of the lack of jobs, because of the grim situation there, for a lot of people, they don't see anything that really inspires them, that makes them feel like they're making a difference, except to join these guys, these murderous jerks, and but if we can provide some other avenue for them, something to where they can make money, something to where they can support their families, something, and where they can still maintain, their religious beliefs to a degree. Of course, there are only certain some extremes that can't be tolerated, but at the same time, that goes for any religion that says, you must die. Obviously, that can't be included. But other than that, if we can just offer those alternatives, if we have a space-based infrastructure, a space-based economy that's open to everybody, all educated people across the world, and then start providing educational opportunities to all of these people, then we have something new. We have something exciting. We have something, profitable for people to engage in. By the way, cyber computerized, thank you so much for your support. How do you feel about that? How does that sound to you?
Yeah, well, so I would like to let me unpack that a little bit, right? Because I think that there's a
Sure.
couple different thread lines that are getting intertwined. Um, the there the government the government is going to have two different roles here in what you're describing. One of them is let's just imagine it being like the global government of 3100, right? That if we're fully colonizing other planets, that means we've gotten to the point where we have a coordinated space response, because for the amount of resources that would be necessary to do this. And if we're going if that's the goal, if that's our exterior goal, like for where we're going to move humanity forward, one of the preconditions for that is making sure that we've pacified humanity at home. And so when you're trying to dictate here on our planet what the policy would, like what conditions would be necessary to be able to have the interplanetary species, the, solving the question of how do we get 6 billion people who have radically different cultures to goal number one: don't kill each other. Right? It's
Right.
that's the bare minimum. And what's proven most effective in history on that front is allowing the different peoples who live in different geographical conditions. I'm one of these people. I subscribe very strongly to the like geopolitical world theory, that the actions, for example, of Russia and Ukraine, if you make sense, even if they're not morally sanctioned, they're understandable if you can look at it in the context of the 800-year history and the emergence of Russia and Kiev on the western part of the Russian steppe. So they were constantly under invasion by Mongols from the east and Vikings
Right.
to the north and
Right.
Europeans to the south. And most recently, they lost 1 out of 3 men in 25 million men in the World War II through the invasion of the Nazis, and then about 300 years ago with the invasion of Napoleon. So there's a cultural, well, from the West and in media, we refer to it as paranoia, but I tend to refer to it as a cultural trauma that they've suffered from this invasion, which makes them hypersensitive to the West placing weapons along their borders.
Hey, once again, some of these chats are coming in, and John Depker, thank you so much for your support. Think the only way they'll bring us together would be an external global threat. That sounds a little bit like an extraterrestrial invasion, maybe so. That is the sort of thing that drew the city states rather of Athens together when Persia invaded. They always fought each other, and then they all got together. The Scottish clans, and obviously in Scotland, who always fought each other. The English invade, they come together, but they all split apart afterwards. Another comment was made that cropped up, or that it occurred to me, is what about is more probable that more conflict among nations will occur as the Earth's environmental conditions deteriorate and resources, especially drinking water, from Michael Maxey. Yeah, well, here's one of the things that space can solve, right? I mean, including drinking water. There is far more water on Europa, or rather beneath the surface of Europa, than there is on Earth. Far, far more. It's most probably the largest ocean in the solar system. So the resources to support our civilization, these raw materials that we need, even just down to the basics, are available on other planets. We just need to develop them. Yes, it does take a lot of money and infrastructure, but that's what Elon's doing, right? I mean, that's what he's trying to develop, and others as well. So, really, the solution for a lot of our problems, including global warming, including that issue, can be handled through space, space-based solar arrays, that sort of thing. All of that is solvable through space. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Please continue with your thought there.
well, no, and you said something that was very important, right? And I wanted to build off of that. We develop a lot of technologies when we're solving the problems of space, and then a lot of those technologies end up revolutionizing our life at home, right? And one of you were following a pattern when it came to the answering the question of water, which is a similar way that Elon Musk used to realize that the cost of the production of rockets was way overblown. Is that he did the math for how much the raw materials would cost if you just ordered them by bulk, and then compared that to the price they were charging for the flight, and
Right.
realizing that he could put together those materials in a far cheaper way than they're being put together at this moment, right? So if you were to conceptualize the even the Earth and do we have sufficient water to feed the population even at its current growth expansion? We do. It's not equitably located, and most of it has salt that has to be removed from it. But those are technological problems that can be solved if we put our attention to it. and
Right.
solving those problems conceptually with a dream of leaving the planet can then be used to fix the planet directly, or to
And
fix the water crisis directly.
so here's another. I mean, obviously, I think we're preaching to the crowd a great
Mhm.
deal here. I am hoping that if once I put the appropriate tags and everything on this video, that some people in your district will actually watch this who may not be into space. But given the fact that so many of our problems actually can be solved by building a space-based economy, since the solutions to so many of our issues lie out there, how in the world politically can we actually get the people in the House and Senate, the president, their constituents? I mean, right now the vast majority of people don't even know we're going back to the moon, let alone the problems that I talk about with returning to the moon. How the hell do we get that to happen?
So there's I mean, it's a good question, right? Because fundamentally, I see this value of having this global inspiration. Primarily, the primary value is for heads of state and governments who can then conceptualize their role in this 1,000-year timeline. But to ask your question about what we could do to revitalize interest in space amongst the general population, the reality is that most of the population, this isn't their primary concern. With inflation, with their domestic issues, with I mean, the 30% rise in food costs and the 80% rise in fuel costs have eaten away any increase in wages that they've received. That I'm talking upper middle class to poor, that they've received in the past 2 years, or any stimulus that they've received. So to that substantial, say 60% of the country, space is just not going to be on their radar. And there's
Yeah.
going to be questions coming up about whether or not the money that's going to space programs should be diverted to improving people's lives in the short term. So that's
Right.
something that we want to be aware of. I think that that's entirely a mistake. I'm working so I have a nonprofit called Near Infinity Art, and there's a street artist in my district, and we raise funds for him through art auctions, so he can paint space murals on on children's campuses, right, at kindergarten, first, second grade level, right. Every space company, I love the scientists that do the work, but oftentimes that do the work that's necessary for us to have a space program. But oftentimes the space world forgets that very few percentage of the population actually think in that type of hyper rational way. Most people are driven by emotions and the right side of their brain. And if you can start to get the public to realize that if they raise the children in an environment where they're dreaming of getting to another planet, where they're dreaming of anything's possible, as opposed to thinking that they're victimized, to be quite frank, um, we can actually make some of these dreams come true. And so, but to answer some of we can get, like, let's now explore the raw brass knuckles politics, right? If you want to get into how is it that as a freshman House member, you're going to be able to affect space policy? Uh, and that's a good question.
Yeah.
So this is actually where my primary focus is not actually space policy. My
Right.
primary focus is on removing the legal, regulatory, and bureaucratic barriers that stand between veterans and getting the life-saving treatments that are available at this moment, but for the legal, regulatory, bureaucratic barriers that have been artificially constructed by the people that are presently in power. And one of the patterns that I would really like to convey in this discussion is we need to change the way like essentially the way we elect representatives, or even the definition that we have for representatives, right? The classic that people ask me all the time, like, Dan, what do you think about, like, what are your thoughts on this particular issue, right? And I have deep thoughts on all of these different issues like we're discussing right now, but it's not my job as a representative to impose my will on my district. It's not my job to go to Washington and join a party and then copy their platform and then go back to my district and say, these are the new rules by which that you're going to live your life. the job of the representative is to mediate the disputes and to understand the concerns of the various groups that live in their district, and then take those concerns to Washington. So if we do want a space program and we do believe in it as a means to unify the globe, because with the unification of the globe, your commenter mentioned that it's most common that you unify against an external threat, but you can also unify against an external hope. And it's easier to go with the dark side of the force, right? But you can go with the light side as well. And the light side's more powerful in like creating the bonds and that last over time.
An external hope. I love the sound of that. Once again, for those of you who are joining us a bit late, we are speaking with Daniel Martinez, congressional candidate running under the Republican Party, just to be clear, in a heavily Democratic district, and which has its own challenges, no doubt. But an individual in the time that I've spent speaking to him obviously is not somebody who supports any particular political agenda. There is no agenda behind this candidate. I really haven't noticed that at all. Instead, it's based on the ideals of what's best for humanity, especially in the long term. You don't get that sort of thing happening in politics. Really quick, for those of my Discord supporters, those who are Patreon supporters and supporters here on the channel, you can hit that little join button. I have some very specific questions from some of those, talking a little bit about that we're not going to make it, for one thing. Again, development of space in the last 50 years, the way climate change is suppressed. I'd say no to surviving until 3100. Surviving the next 1,000 years in one piece may require some grand unifying event, such as a global disaster, a volcanic super eruption of some kind, that sort of thing. Those sorts of comments are coming across. So once again, this is again, we're getting we're getting these sorts of opinions from our viewers, which I certainly expected. Our belief, our general, the general overall belief on the part of a lot of people is we're not going to make it for that next 1,000 years. We don't see how in the hell we can possibly make it for the next 1,000 years. It just doesn't seem possible. And think about it for a moment. I saw a documentary about this. If we look at the current day as the beginning of human civilization, or closer to the beginning of human civilization than closer to the end. Think of the responsibility that we have to future generations. Think of the many, many hundreds of billions of people who have yet to be born, who will never be born if we take ourselves out. Think of how many unborn we're destroying in the process of not thinking long term, in terms of not coming up with long term solutions to get us to 3100. And once again, obviously we preach to the choir here, but we feel that space is one of the best ways to do that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. And so let's keep with the thought experiment, right? So, but now let's fast forward. Let's go backwards in time from the 3100 fully interplanetary goal, and now let's go to 2100, right? Sorry, 2300. Okay. No, 2100. Sorry, I'm not good with numbers.
That's good.
So let's go 2100, right? We're 80 years into the future, right? What goals could we envision for the globe, right, that are consistent with history, that we could set for ourselves, that are reasonably attainable with the technology that's available presently, or is reasonably likely to be present in the short term, the medium term? And what I would make the suggestion, going back through history, with the Library of Alexandria. Let's conceptualize the Library of Alexandria that's present on Mars and present on the moon. And we can conceptualize that as the backup of the combined information of mankind. And right. I would posit that if we set that as a goal for 2100 to back up the stored memory of mankind, right? Like the historical, we'll begin with the historical texts. And we invite that opportunity to every culture on the planet, including those in the Middle East, to have their whatever impression they've made on the planet up to this point stored in that backup. And then we could we could set a global aim for cooperation towards building that goal.
You know,
And if
that's
we
an
could,
exciting idea. I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead and finish your thought.
yeah, just the last part would be, in my conception of that, we would be cooperate by 2100. We would be cooperating with China, and we'd be cooperating with Russia and the European Union and the Indian Space Program and the hopefully by then Israeli Abraham Accords, Saudi Arabia, and et al. Cooperative space program in the Middle East.
Well, you know, and that's something that suddenly strikes me as being quite intriguing. I never really thought about a Library of Alexandria on a different planet to preserve human knowledge. But if you do provide that opportunity, think of the possibilities. Everybody is invited to contribute. Everybody is welcome to contribute their own points of view, their own history, the things they regard as accomplishments, and we don't restrict it to anybody. Everyone gets an opportunity to put, no matter how messed up their point of view might be, everybody gets an opportunity to put their stuff there. Because if we leave stuff out, if we delete the things that we don't regard as being politically correct or things that we regard as being atrocious, even horrific kinds of thoughts, we are also eliminating facts about our own species. We're deleting things about ourselves that some other civilization that discovers us will never know. They'll never
and
know,
could
for example,
and
about
and
racism and that sort of thing.
yeah, and could learn from and make sure they do not repeat those things into the future.
Exactly. So it might even be beneficial for our own, civilization. Let's say, for example, we put that library there, and then in 2150 we wipe ourselves out. We nuke ourselves, but we don't destroy ourselves completely. It takes another 1,000 years for us to rebuild or something, and then we make our way to the moon or to Mars or whatever. Come across this library and find all the information as to the mistakes we made in the past, and perhaps don't repeat them again. I hate to look upon that. That's a grim future, obviously, but one that perhaps contributes to the long-term survival of the human race. There's a lot of stuff coming across, and I a lot of questions and things like that there plenty, believe me, plenty of political issues that we could discuss right now. We need to rifle in on the whole uh, space infrastructure, space economy sort of thoughts. That's
Yeah, and
essentially what we're focusing on right now.
yeah, and
So
if I can address just your audience that's asking the questions unrelated to the specific topic, I'm happy to do an AMA with you at some point in the future where we just go through all of these. But for
that'd be fun. Sure, I definitely like that. All right, so yeah, the library, a Library of Alexandria on the moon. I would say the moon would probably be one of the best places, simply because Mars does have a climate. Mars does have an environment that is less conducive to the long-term survival of anything. It erodes, the wind is there, it erodes things away, that sort of thing. So the moon might be the best place. So, then how do we do? Can you think about the specifics of, how we go about that? How do we get people to contribute? How do we get people excited about it? How do we get the money? How do we convince the governments of the world to actually spend the money to make it happen?
Well, so historically, I'll answer that in a couple different questions. Like one, we're adding more granular detail the closer we get to the present moment on the timeline, right? So we have more detail of what we can more easily visualize this conception of the Library of Alexandria 2100 than we can what a more Star Trekky world would ideally look like by 3100. And um, but to answer your question, what I would do is go even closer to us to the present moment on the timeline, and let's discuss 2050, right? What would we need to have done by 2050 to make the Library of Alexandria possible by the end of the century? And what I would suggest is that by 2050 we would have to have at least base level outposts on I'm going to conceptualize having Library of Alexandria in both Mars and the Moon for 2100. So what I would say is by 2050 we'd have to have at least a basic outpost that we're sending supplies to with autonomous vehicles operating to build out space camps, right? That's kind of the way that I conceptualize it. And I would hope that by that point, we would at least have a modular nuclear reactor on each one of those celestial bodies. And
Right.
I would hope, I mean, I believe that's technically feasible within the capabilities that we have at the present. If Starship can get online in the short term, I don't see any limitation for the kilograms delivery. And if we can start to conceptualize that as the United States' gift towards jumpstarting this program, and we were to make, say, 50% of the energy available or energy produced allocated to the different partners that we mentioned in that were participating in 2100, then to incentivize them to be able to build out some additional infrastructure.
Right. So we need the moon base first,
Hmm.
and once again, yeah, I like the idea of the the long term information knowledge repository because everybody's contributing to that, right? So therefore, you would require international collaboration in order to make that happen because right now what we're looking at is international. International competition, and even worse than that, most probably international conflict over the moon. I mean, that is the kind of discussion that we're having right now. Bill Nelson, makes that very clear that the Chinese may be looking to establish themselves as in control of the moon, in control of the moon's resources. Which, by the way, I think they probably will if nobody else in the world does anything to establish a base on the moon. I think if China has no competition, then yeah, they are going to take control of those resources because they've done that in other places. Obviously, getting a stranglehold on economic resources is a huge thing. But still, if we have a goal in common that everybody can agree on, and who wouldn't agree on this, right? Everybody wants to contribute knowledge to the long-term legacy of the human race, then maybe we have a little bit more collaboration. We have a reason to collaborate in spite of all the crises that we're currently having. But yeah,
Yeah. So
it's a
and
go ahead.
yeah, and building off what you were just talking about with regards to a commonality in all human civilizations, we all, I mean, going back to the petroglyphs that you find in the caves from tens of thousands of years back, we have an innate desire to tell our stories, and all cultures share that. The Ottoman Empire, the Romans, right? The Greeks who built the Library of Alexandria, right? Um, so
Yeah,
yeah, no, I absolutely think that in the Russian peoples would like to have their story etched into the granite accounting of mankind, right? And I believe that the Chinese people would want that as well. And one of the saddening things about the present conflict that we have with the West and Russia at the moment is, aside from the fact that Russia has 6,000 nuclear weapons, and they're one of, I want to say, three countries that possess anti-satellite missiles, so they could single-handedly make sure that we don't have access to space. Um, one of the shining one of the bright spots of the Cold War was our space cooperation with Russia.
yeah,
Despite having nuclear weapons pointed at every major city for the past 50 years,
right.
we managed to, through science, primarily communicate with a people that were culturally different than us, with an economic system that couldn't be more different than ours, and a general authoritarian structure that didn't have any respect for human life. But despite that, we were able to work together to avert what is in our mutual interest: complete total self-destruction.
Yeah.
And
And it
yeah,
was astonishing. The collaboration we did with the Soviets at the time was very impressive, and now that collaboration seems to be falling apart. Real quick, again, we just got a couple more super chats. John Depker, thank you so much for your support, and hello to Victoria, 7 years old. Wow, Starting him off young. I'm thrilled that she's a fan. And Johnny Spacer, thank you so much for your support. And real quick, I want to include also some additional comments from my Discord followers as well. My general supporters of the point about backup of human knowledge and understanding would have to be done by a truly neutral body. In other words, this Library of Alexandria, or one created such as The Hague. Not even sure if the UN would be able to get full agreement politically with certain larger rogue nations that want to rewrite history to their own ends, including inside the U.S. here right now. There's also something called Earth Black Box that my colleague in Yorkshire contributed. Unless we dramatically terraform our way of life, climate change and other man-made perils will cause our civilization to crash. Earth's black box will record every step we take towards this catastrophe. Hundreds of data sets, measurements, and interactions relating to the health of our planet will be continuously collected and safely stored for future generations. The purpose of the device is to provide an unbiased account of the events that lead to the demise of the planet, hold accountability for future generations, and inspire urgent action. How the story ends is completely up to us. Only one thing is certain: your action, inactions, and interactions are being recorded. A couple more real quick. Aztec Leon says, well, the moon has its own issues with regard to maintaining historical records. Meteor impacts, yeah, we maybe had to bury it to keep it from getting wiped out by a meteor impact, cosmic rays, etc. The moon is closer to the Earth, almost like a seventh continent, says Carl Thamel. Eventually, an additional backup at a place like Deimos is recommendable. Good idea. Aztec then says, I totally agree to have a modular nuclear reactor on both the moon and Mars for different reasons. The moon, obviously, only 2 weeks of sunlight per month. With Mars, dust storms covering solar arrays, small nuclear reactors, which, by the way, my daughter is currently working on. Small modular nuclear reactors are part of the things that she's contributing to. So yeah, cool stuff happening there as well. So thank you very much for your contributions, and once again, trying to keep up with the rest of the chat. Please continue. Appreciate you giving me the time to bring my viewers into the conversation.
Oh yeah, no, I mean this is the format of communication in the future, right? This type of interaction is ideal. And that I want to and thank you and for your listeners for going down this particular rabbit hole with me.
Yeah, it's neat stuff. Botto's World, by the way, provides a great deal of, just gave us a nice super chat. Really do appreciate your support. And yes, we're going to keep that content coming. So yeah, very, it's interesting. Now, once again, there are still questions coming down the line that I've noticed here in terms of, how do you get these sorts of things? I mean, obviously, even though you want to give, your constituents what they're asking for, that is your job as an elected representative. Nevertheless, there are certain things I think that you have, a personal stake in. For example, the treatment for veterans and the what many doctors would regard an unconventional method of doing it, but still one that's proven to work. How on this limited stage, how do you get Congress to pay attention to that? How do you get Congress to implement changes? Do you have a plan for that?
Yes. Okay. So let's focus on this type of the politics and ask me follow-up questions, right? Please. So the there's a movement on the left that's very unhappy with the present iteration of Democratic leadership because the leadership is widely seen as completely irresponsive to the needs of the base, right? And there was a subsection movement that came out to force the vote, right? That's force the vote on issues that matter to them. Force the vote on Medicare for all, and so they put pressure on their lawmakers, especially their progressive lawmakers, to condition their vote for Speaker of the House, right? And that it's presently Nancy Pelosi, and after the fall is very likely to be Kevin McCarthy, right? To condition their vote for Speaker of the House on getting a vote for a policy issue that matters to a core constituency on day one, like raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, something along those lines if you're on the left, right?
Right.
I have I think that's a wonderful idea, right? Because most people don't realize that the first vote that every House member takes is for the Speaker of the House, and that position lasts for 2 years, the entire length of the time that the House is in session. and the Speaker of the House controls 100% of the items that come up for a vote. And they also control the subpoena power of the House. And so, unless the Speaker allows the issue to come for a vote, it doesn't happen under the present iteration of the rules. And so that's why the activists focused on conditioning your vote for Speaker, because that's at the point in which you have leverage to be able to get them to support this issue. And so, building off of that, I want to keep in mind um, this change in conceptual pattern, right? I see the veteran suicide issue as a problem with a daily cost of inaction. The daily cost of inaction meaning the 22 veterans that kill themselves every day. That
Right.
problem has a solution that's available that could lead to a 75 to 80% reduction if implemented, right? That technological solution is available today, right? So what's the reason why? What's standing between implementation of the solution at each one of the 1,400 VA facilities that are available throughout the country? And the answer to that is there's a legal barrier, the regulatory barriers, and there's bureaucratic barriers. All
Right.
three of those things can be lifted by politicians by rewriting the rules. So for me, as long as there's a problem with the daily cost of inaction, especially one that's a life or death matter, and there's a solution that's available, I would never support a Speaker of the House that didn't agree to remove these barriers on day one. And
So that would
so,
be
yes,
that would be your make or break thing, right? In other words, if Kevin, you once again, just to reiterate for those of you who have joined us recently, Mr. Martinez is running as a
yeah.
Republican. So Mr. McCarthy, you want to be Speaker of the House. I'm not voting for you unless you do blank. Then is the veterans treatment issue the one that's going to be an absolute?
Well, that's the one that's going to be the absolute, right? Because you have to stay laser focused on one particular issue. Because if you throw out 100 different things, you're not going to get any of them. And also, the daily cost of inaction of this one is human lives. So it, it's an unacceptable response to say, why don't we why don't you just vote for me now, and then we'll work on this. We'll talk about this, and maybe in 6 months, right? Because that 6 months is an extra 3,500 suicides. So on this
Right.
issue, I've never met a human being from either the right or the left that thinks that if there's a daily cost of inaction like this and a solution that can be implemented, that those barriers should stay up. And
It
so,
sounds like a bipartisan thing too. It sounds like something that, I mean, we're talking about saving the lives of veterans. That's something that most politicians are going to get behind, you would think.
you would think, yeah, it's so I'm acting under the assumption that the vast majority of them are either not aware that the problem is exists, or they're not aware that a solution exists,
Right.
and that ties in part much to the, like, Elon Musk has talked about this, right? That the average age of the main problem with the U.S. government is the gerontocracy. That the the average age is upwards of the 70s, and a
Right.
lot of these individuals have been playing the game for so long that they can't conceptualize a way that the game should be played more efficiently, or in other
Right.
words, updating the regulatory schemes that we have that were valid in the 1900s, like when or the yeah that were valid during the space program in the 60s, right? When we were having, what, 8 launches a year, maybe, and upgrading that to a future where, if we're going to have presence, like permanent presence on Moon and Mars, we're talking about daily departures similar to air traffic, right?
Right.
So the somewhere between now and then, that regulatory scheme has to be completely updated for the modern times. And so
Exactly.
that gets done once the concept of leadership, and once the priorities that we place on choosing the Speaker of the House change. And I believe that the veteran suicide issue is one that appeals to both sides, to be able to highlight how off course the leadership of both parties has been and will continue to be unless we do something about it. And if I could point out a couple other things, there's 6 Navy SEALs that are currently running specifically with the goal of of having a new speaker in the House that's willing to address these issues.
Wow.
Um,
I didn't
I'm
know
wor-
that. That's amazing.
so I'm working with them, and so the plan is comes September, right? Let's assume you're my opponent, and come September, uh, an organization calls you, and the person says, "Hi, I'm a Navy SEAL. We've got this organization. We'd like to endorse the candidate in the race that's going to do most to remove these legal, regulatory, bureaucratic barriers that stand between like my brothers and getting the treatment they need to not kill themselves.
Right,
Um,
right.
you're the incumbent. We'd like to have an opportunity to give you a presentation." And so when they arrive in the office, I mean, any self-interested politician would love this endorsement 2 months before the election.
Of course.
So
Yeah,
then they walk into your office. They present to you the scientific evidence that's been accumulated over the past 20 years through Johns Hopkins University, University of Basel, MAPS organization, and the science is just outstanding. And then they propose. That's like the left brain part of the argument, and the right brain part of the argument is the testimonial from these guys. How in order for them to go overseas and execute the missions that we send them on, they have to take human lives as part of every mission. And they have to, in order to effectuate that goal, turn off the empathic switch that we all have that makes us see in other creatures parts of ourselves, right? We feel it when other sentient creatures are in pain, and they have to train to turn
yeah.
that off so they can execute the mission.
Right,
And
right,
then when they're exposed to explosions and to traumas when they're out there, that switch can get stuck off, and then they come back and they can see, like, they can logically process that they have a wife and kids, but they can't emotionally connect, and that
right.
starts the spiral of destruction that results in suicide.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from a military town. I'm from Colorado Springs. We had both an Army base, Air Force base, the Air Force Academy, NORAD. I have lots of military friends, and yeah,
Hmm.
these problems become, it's everywhere. IQ, by the way, thank you for the 2 quid. NASA to be used about inspiration. Yeah, I mean, NASA needs to more thoroughly engage with the public to inspire us about about positive things for the future. I would agree with that, even though NASA, I don't think, has a role in terms of building moon rockets anymore. Obviously, I think that they do have a role to play in engaging with the public and getting us inspired on these kinds of things in the future. So, yeah, that is a big thing indeed. Curbing a highly infectious, yeah, it's all of this is a lot of comments are being made about a whole variety of different issues. Darth Rust, however, asked, he's one of my most helpful viewers. Do you know? Do you have examples of who some of those six SEALs are seeking office and in what districts? Can you give us some examples of some of those folks?
What I would suggest is if you Google Washington Examiner, six Navy SEALs running for Congress,
Mhm.
it'll pull them up.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that.
A-
Just making sure that we're.
Yeah, but so
Go ahead.
yeah, so I mean, just building up on finalizing out that political strategy, right? So they hear the testimonials from the guys themselves, right? But then the second half of the testimonials is from the perspective of the spouses, because they most of the spouses, like, I mean, they witnessed this, and given the nature of what their husbands do, that's classified, so they're not aware of anything that they're really doing when they're over there. But they when they so they tell the story from their perspective of being skeptics, and then watching their family deteriorate, and watching the relationship with the vet and their children deteriorate, and getting hopeless, and then seeing somebody who came back from one of these treatments, like, they see the look on their face, and it's some version of like, look, what did you take, and where can I get some?
Yeah.
And then they take the leap of faith into this unknown, and these guys are already getting the treatments. They just have to go into the black market, like the we're sending our soldiers who do these things for us into the black market of Mexico to be able to find these treatment protocols, and that's just absolutely unacceptable. And so, but so from the perspective of the spouses, they tell that story, and then they tell also the hopeful story at the end about how they get the soldier back and how they get to re-engage with them emotionally and see them connect with their kids. It's a incredibly powerful story. But the spouse is also we also have the spouse that has the nonprofit that collects these testimonials also has testimonials from spouses who did not discover the treatment protocol until their after it was too late. And
What's
so,
we just had a comment coming in from my supporter in Yorkshire, real
mhm.
quick. I'm sorry. Are you giving us a time reminder? Yeah, we have 4 minutes. Really quick,
Yep.
we're about to wrap up here, but I want to, and I'm going to make a couple of announcements about this. For those of you who have pre-ordered the Angry Astronaut sunglasses, there is an email in the description here where I want you to please send me your shipping information so we can get a final price to you, and then ship you, give you have the balance still owed, and then ship it to you. So that email address is embedded in the description. Please email me with your delivery information and also the PayPal ID that you use to put your initial payment on it. We still have a little over 3 dozen of these sunglasses left. So for those of you who are still interested in that, you can pre-order them. That opportunity is still there. Just as a quick reminder, and I'm also going to do a specific short about that issue as well. But just want to remind all of my viewers who have done those pre-orders that just send me your shipping address so we can get this wrapped up and get it all shipped to you. All right, and please please subscribe, and I want to go ahead and kind of give you the last word, sir. Give me what do you want the viewers to, what sort of thing, especially about space, what is it that you would like us to know about, how you're going to make a difference, or just one thing. Give us one thing that you think you can do to change regulations, to change, people's interest in space or whatever. Can you give us something impactful there at the end of our conversation?
Yeah. First of all, let's call this part one, right? Because we still have a little bit. Well, let's if your fans would like, I'm more than happy to continue out the conversation. Um, the primary thing that I can offer is, and what I would really request from every one of you, is to try to imagine what world you would like to see in 3100, and really to imagine that the spark of humanity does exist, and try to figure out what actions you could do in the present to make sure that future possibility manifests itself.
Well, once again, I deeply appreciate everything you've said. I see an opportunity to where we may be able to have a conversation in the future, or perhaps for me to come to your district and interview you at some point, because there's a lot of space related stuff in California anyway. I come out there
Yeah,
sometimes. So I think that might be, a wonderful thing as well. But I
absolutely.
deeply
And if I could
appreciate
say
you
one,
joining it. Go ahead.
if I could say one
Please go
last
ahead.
thing,
Please go ahead.
I'm not again. I'm not a professional politician, so I always forget this part. My
Mhm.
website is www.danmartinez4congress.com. That's the number four. And I'm terrible with social media, guys. So if any of you guys could follow me on Twitter, I really need to get my Twitter followers above single digits. And I was one of the people who believed that social media was destroying mankind before I decided to run for office. And I don't take money from any political organization whatsoever. It's entirely crowd-funded. So if you guys want an advocate that's not just running for Congress, but running to replace the Speaker of the House, you guys kind of understand how I conceptualize these issues. So,
And also to make one thing really clear, I'm not in the habit of endorsing people for political office. In the time that I've had this channel, I've never done that. But the time that I've had the chance I've had to speak with you, to get the impression that you obviously don't follow any particular, political agendas. I don't hear you parroting off the same things that your party says, and that would apply to a Democrat as well as a Republican. Instead of just being a mouthpiece for the party, instead you've got your own viewpoints, distinctive and interesting viewpoints, and ones that I think are good for the future of the human race. So I definitely support your run, and I wish you the very best.
I appreciate that. I really do.
And
Thanks for
until we have more folks in the government who really support spaceflight, who understand that our future lies in the construction of a space-based economy, until this economy exists and everybody is participating in it, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.